Welcome to Beyond the Call, where history, leadership, and heroism come alive. Today's story explores Seaman First Class Johnnie David Hutchins at Leh in 1943, a powerful account of courage and responsibility in combat. If you enjoy learning more about military history and extraordinary individuals, you can find more articles, podcasts, and resources at trackpads.com.
Before we continue, I want to mention the Medal of Honor book series that accompanies this work. These books tell the stories of America's Medal of Honor recipients in a serious, readable, and historically grounded format, with each volume focused on a specific campaign, battle, or part of the war. They are available in color paperback, Kindle ebook, and matching audiobook editions. You can find them at militaryauthor.me.
In the gray light off the New Guinea coast, a long line of amphibious ships worked its way towards the beaches near Leh. Among them was Landing Ship Tank 473, packed with soldiers, vehicles, and supplies that had to arrive in the right place at the right time. The air already carried the distant rumble of guns from shore and the drone of aircraft circling somewhere beyond the clouds. On the bridge, a young sailor from Texas stood at the wheel, following course orders with practiced hands and steady nerves. His name was Johnnie David Hutchins. His job was to keep the big ship exactly where it needed to be. The Japanese defenders were determined to break the assault before it reached land. Shore batteries began to test the range, throwing up geysers of water around the advancing formation. Bombers and attack aircraft swept in, adding explosions in the sky to the impacts in the sea. Each incoming shell meant another adjustment in course, another careful turn to avoid both the enemy's fire and the other ships nearby. Hutchins listened for the conning officer's commands and translated them into smooth, deliberate movements on the wheel. Beyond the Call is the Monday feature of Dispatch, U.S. Military History magazine. On that day off Leh, the responsibility behind that simple job suddenly became a matter of life and death. As the convoy pushed closer, a new danger appeared. Lookouts shouted as they picked up the white track of a torpedo cutting through the choppy water, aimed straight at the ship's broadside. A torpedo hit there could have torn the hull open and sent hundreds of men and tons of equipment to the bottom in seconds. The only way to survive was to swing the bow toward the oncoming weapon so it would pass along the side instead of striking square on. Orders for the turn rang out in the pilothouse. Hutchins hauled the wheel over, feeling the resistance as the long hull began the slow process of coming around. Time seemed very short. Before the turn could be completed, another threat found its mark. A bomb from an attacking aircraft struck the area of the pilothouse, filling the compartment with blast, smoke, and flying fragments. Steel and glass turned into shards that cut down the men at their stations. The helmsman was thrown away from the wheel. Voices that had been calm and clipped a moment earlier were suddenly silent. In the middle of this chaos, the landing ship Tank drifted with no one guiding her, still exposed to the torpedo that was closing the distance. For a few terrible seconds, the ship and everyone aboard balanced on the edge of disaster. Hutchins had been in the center of that blast. He was mortally wounded, his body torn by fragments, and his vision blurred by dust and blood. Even in that state, he could still see the wheel spinning freely, feel the ship losing her careful turn, and understand what that meant. There was no time to call for help or wait for someone else to step in. With the last reserves of his strength, he pulled himself upright and reached for the wheel he had guided through so many safer waters. It was a simple action. It was also everything. He forced the wheel over to complete the evasive maneuver. The rudders dug into the water, and the bow continued to swing. Outside, to the soldiers watching from the deck, and to the crews of nearby ships, it looked like a deliberate, if slow, change of course.
Inside the damaged pilothouse, it was the result of one dying sailor refusing to let his ship drift into destruction. The torpedo raced toward the spot where the ship had been moments earlier, then slid down the hull without exploding. The massive blast that might have broken the ship's back never came. Hutchins stayed at the wheel until he could hold on no longer.
To understand how he reached that moment, it helps to go back to his beginnings. Johnnie Hutchins was born in Weimar, a small town in Texas, in 1922. He grew up during hard years when steady work was scarce and every member of a family was expected to contribute. School ended for him after the 7th grade, not because he lacked ability, but because he chose to help support the household. He worked a series of jobs that demanded long hours and physical effort. Those years taught him that responsibility meant doing what needed to be done, whether anyone noticed or not. When global war drew the United States into the fighting, Hutchins was part of a generation that saw enlistment as both duty and opportunity. The Navy offered regular pay, a way to send money home, and the chance to see more than the fields and roads of his childhood. He entered the Naval Reserve in 1942 and began training that would turn a farm and factory worker into a sailor. Basic training and seamanship schools taught him how to handle lines, stand watch, and understand orders shouted over wind and machinery. He learned the feel of heavy ships under his hands, how quickly they answered the wheel, and how small motions at the helm could make a big difference. His aptitude with vehicles and machinery made the helm a natural place for him. Steering a landing ship tank was not glamorous, but it demanded patience and precision. These ships were large and slow, with shallow drafts that made them handle differently from sleek warships. Guiding them through crowded anchorages and along tight approach lanes required a calm temperament and an eye for how each small correction played out over time. Shipmates came to trust Hutchins in that role. They knew that when he had the wheel, the ship would follow the ordered course without fuss. That quiet trust mattered when the ship headed toward enemy shores. The official Medal of Honor citation describes his actions with phrases like extraordinary heroism and conspicuous valor. In everyday language, that means he did something far beyond what anyone could reasonably expect from a sailor who had just been fatally wounded. The citation speaks of a veritable hail of fire, a phrase that captures a scene where shells, bombs, and a torpedo all threatened the ship in quick succession. It notes that the helmsman was dislodged by the blast, leaving the ship helplessly exposed to the oncoming weapon. Those are formal words, yet they describe a very concrete reality. A large ship without someone at the wheel in a narrow, crowded approach is only moments away from grave danger. The citation states that Hutchins grasped the wheel and, with full knowledge of the consequences of his act, continued the turn until the ship cleared the torpedo's path. That line reminds us that he knew what it would cost him to stay at his post. He could have fallen back, tried to crawl away, or focused only on his own injuries. Instead, he chose to finish the single task that could save the ship and the hundreds of lives aboard. Another key phrase notes that he expended the last of his strength in that effort. It was not a brief gesture. It was a sustained act of will in the face of death, carried through until the danger had passed. The impact of that choice rippled out far beyond the pilothouse. By steering the ship clear, Hutchins preserved a vital link in the chain of the lay landings. The soldiers, vehicles, and supplies aboard landing ship Tank 473 reached the shore ready to fight. They were not lost in an underwater wreck or scattered across the surface in burning debris. Each rifle that fired in the fight for Leh, each tank that moved off that ship and into battle, represented lives and capabilities that his act had preserved. The wider campaign in New Guinea relied on countless such deliveries to keep pressure on Japanese positions and push the front line forward. Hutchins' story also speaks to leadership and character in a way that goes beyond rank. He never wore officer's stripes. He did not command a platoon or a division. What he did possess was a deep sense of responsibility for the task in front of him, whether that was supporting his family as a teenager or steering a massive ship through hazardous waters. When the crisis came, he did not need a formal order to do the right thing. His instincts, shaped by years of quiet reliability, took him back to the wheel. That is a form of leadership anyone can practice. It is leadership through steadfast example. After his death, Hutchins's family received his Medal of Honor, a symbol of the nation's recognition of his sacrifice. Communities in Texas marked his memory with plaques and displays that told visitors who he had been and what he had done. The Navy honored him by commissioning a destroyer escort named Johnnie Hutchins, a warship that carried his name into other seas and other operations. Each sailor who walked past that name on the hull served aboard a ship that stood as a floating memorial to a seaman who had once held the wheel under fire. His grave and those memorials give people today a place to connect the words of the citation to a real human life. When we remember Johnnie David Hutchins, we remember more than a dramatic moment in battle. We remember a young man shaped by hard times, ordinary work, and quiet duty, who met an extraordinary test with calm resolve. His final act at the helm of a wounded ship shows how much rests on the choices of individuals whose names are not always widely known. It reminds us that courage can appear in the space of a few seconds, yet grow out of years of steady, unseen service. In telling his story, we keep that truth alive for future generations who may one day find themselves with their hands on a different kind of wheel.